Ever wondered what it would be like to have the mind of Sherlock Holmes? Or if it's even worth it to base your real-life mental prowess on a fictional character? Well, I wanted to find that out for myself because I've thought a lot about the role of basing ourselves on fictional characters, and that's why I reached out to speak with Ben Cardall. One of several reasons, because he's a man of many talents, and he's billed as a deductionist, which places him in this realm of being like Sherlock Holmes. Now, this is not a term that is exclusive to Ben. There are actually quite a few people out there who either use such skills professionally or otherwise teach them. But what is a deductionist? Well, the model appears to be something like Sherlock Holmes, and we're going to get into this in the interview. But just briefly, it's the idea that we all see, but only some of us observe. So you remember that scene at the beginning of A Scandal in Bohemia? Watson tells Sherlock, and here I'm paraphrasing a little bit, "I believe, dear Sherlock, that my eyes are as good as yours." "Quite so," Sherlock answers. "However, you see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room." "Hundreds of times," Watson agrees. "Then, how many steps are there?" Sherlock asks. "How many steps?" Watson replies. "I don't know." "And that is just my point," Sherlock replies. "I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen and observed." So this ability to see and observe, that's at the core of deductionism, but there's more. There's the role of memory techniques where Ben really shines. And when you pair the skills of observation, really seeing the world, and combine it with the raw ability to memorize information on the fly, well, that's when real magic happens. But speaking of magic, Ben is also a magician and a mentalist. And you know, we kind of dance around the topic a little bit of magic. And if you want to know the secrets that we're talking about, you can find some of Ben's magic trainings on Penguin Magic, if you please.
You're going to learn some incredible things. You're going to learn how to memorize a deck of cards in apparently seconds.
Where I myself am often found and have quite a library that I've collected over time. And he's a great teacher of how you can become a mentalist yourself and a magician. So just fascinating and amazing stuff. Good, solid tricks, routines, and ways of thinking. Now, you'll also want to get subscribed to Ben's YouTube channel where he makes using memory techniques exciting and real through various challenges that we'll talk about in today's discussion, especially the willingness to take on what Ben calls Condition X, which is essentially what life is throwing at us all the time. Also, you want to check out bencardall.com where you'll find many fascinating videos and articles about using your noggin better and memory techniques as you both see and observe the world, and even better, remember what you've observed. So enjoy this conversation about all things memory, critical thinking, and if you're new here, please subscribe, hit that thumbs up, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Really, do you see or do you also observe? We want to hear from you. Ben, thanks so much for joining me on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. It's really fun to, learn more about what you're doing. And just by way of beginning, what does it mean to look into Sherlock Holmes' mind? What's in there in your experience?
Oh wow! It's what isn't in there. there's always something knocking around in the dark recesses of his mind somewhere. At least for my two pennies, because as much as I like to talk about him, he's not real,
right?
But yeah, I've often found that given the kind of adventures that it takes me on, it's better to be prepared for as many kind of eventualities as possible than it is to say, this won't work or this won't work or this won't work. Mostly because you simply don't know.
Right.
Humans being as they are, it's very difficult to predict what kind of a situation you're going to end up in. So it's better to prepare myself for as many eventualities as I can, so I'm better suited to any kind of task that's pushed my way.
Right. So let's get into this. How do you come to be pushed into needing these skills, and where everything has an origin story? So, what is the origin story here?
Well, mine kind of starts off quite depressing, maybe even a little bit sad, to be honest. The short version of quite a long story is you know how everybody has their first love, and it's this quite deep, passionate, boiling love that exists when you're a teen. And I found out when I was 14 at the time that mine had been seeing my best friend behind my back for a good number of months. But at that time, we were also reading Sherlock Holmes as part of our English studies class. And I was already quite interested in the character anyway. And it was The Adventure of the Speckled Band we were reading, and it had the parts of the book at the front that tells you a little bit about the history, a little bit about the origin of the story, the fact that he's not solely fictional, he has some reality basis to him as a character. So it was kind of like from that stage, I made a vow almost to myself that I would never be lied to again, and it kind of stemmed into obsession from there. So that now, close to 21 years later, I haven't skipped a day of training, and it's not one of those things that I've ever had to question or reevaluate. I suppose you could argue it's tough to end tough to argue where my emotional damage ends and my my need to acquire new attributes begins. But that's kind of where it started, and then I got into magic that led to me being more inclined towards mentalism as a performance style, and I kind of cut my teeth, I suppose would be the best phrase,
right.
In the industry, as being the guy who wanted to be able to do the things that the patter said you could do. I was like, there's more than enough people looking into how to make it look like you're doing something. Who's actually looking at how it's possible to be able to actually do these things? And so that's kind of where my fortes began. And then I wrote the monographs, which was at this stage, I think it's easily around 8 or 9 years ago, that came out, and that put me in touch with a number of quite kind of daunting characters within the field that led me to the consulting detection work, but in a real life scenario. So yeah, I now spend my days working as it's quite a posh title, the director of behavioral insight for a company called ProCipher, and I do some consulting for Nodum Global as well. So yeah, that's kind of the short version of a very long tale.
And have people stopped lying to you?
People have stopped trying, mostly. People have stopped trying. There's me and my partner have an understanding that surprises are pointless. So she tends to, like, if it comes to birthdays and Christmas, where the customary endeavor is gift giving, she'll get a little random one, just keep it in a box, just to keep me entertained, see if I can try and figure out what it is. My kids, they don't bother at all. Most of my immediate friends and family just it's there now that I've kind of hit that status that most people are just willing to accept the fact that I'll probably catch it if it is, which sounds could be quite arrogant to say out loud, but I don't believe it is. It's just that I spend most of my days on rather than off,
right.
If you know what I mean. So it kind of bleeds into everyday life from there. But yeah, the short version, my kids have been heard on more than one occasion when they were a lot younger. They're much older now, but like when they were little children, sat upstairs going, "Don't do that, Dad will know."
Right. Well, there's a lot to dig in there, and I think you and I share a certain code, so I want to unpack it because I know the difference between magic and mentalism, or
yes,
at least I know some of the arguments about which is which. So, just for people who aren't following that plot, what is magic? What is mentalism? Why would you find yourself drawn to one rather than the other?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been this big kind of movement almost within the community of whether it's art or whether it's performance or whether it's simply whatever it is. It's the animal. I fall into the camp of it being art. You take a lot of artistic license with your performances, the words that you say, how you dress, the things that you show people, that kind of thing. So that would be job one. But they're ultimately the magicians of the group would be the guys that deal in vanishes, productions, transpositions, telekinesis, and making things float. You're dealing with fire, animals, this kind of thing. You know, the Siegfried and Roys, the David Copperfields, the David Blaines, the Dynamos, the Penn and Tellers. These are your magicians of the community, whereas the mentalists, in at least in my experience, it will differ depending upon what kind of a performance artist you are. The mentalists are the guys that pretend to read minds, the guys that make it look like they can hear what you're thinking or know what you're about to do before you're going to do it, that kind of thing. The Darren Browns of the world. Right. This is largely where the difference lies in that area. And being, that I was more obsessed with understanding people and their reasons for doing things and their motivations behind behavior and what influences them to think and feel and act in certain ways, that when I first started to look at magic, there's some incredible tricks, some incredible things that you can show people. And they really are cool. And it doesn't take away from any kind of magician on the planet. It's just my opinion that when it comes to that kind of area and you're there as a performer, what are you? Are you just a likable, confident guy that knows where to shop? Or are you a magician? Are you a mentalist? That's kind of where I struck the difference there.
Right.
So I was drawn more to mentalism because it's less about the pick a card routines, more about the name a card, and I will work with that, and that's kind of where minimal differences start to eke out. There's lots of other kind of basic games that mentalists play that magicians don't tend to, like the what hand is the coin in game, to see if you can try and figure that type of thing out, and it's often much more of a direct way to connect with someone, because you're ultimately dealing with more internal aspects when it comes to memory, when it comes to mentalism, than it is when you're looking at magic, which is quite a spectacle and can equally move people in just as many profound ways. But when you're looking at mentalism and you get to deal with somebody's thoughts or their memories or their feelings or experiences of certain things, depending upon whatever it is that you're performing, that's the main difference, at least for my two pennies anyway.
Right. Well, I saw a performance that you did, and it involved deriving a name from a person. And
yes,
I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't seen one go in that particular. I mean, I've seen similar things, but not in that particular way. And I wasn't actually even sure at the end. And I don't want to give away too much because that would be against the siblinghood. But nonetheless, I saw that there were some things exchanged, but it seemed like you actually were going the lengths to derive the name through some sort of deductive process. So I was just, like it was that was a lot to hide multiple outs, so to speak, if that's what you were doing. So I don't know. Are you trying to, as you said, you do what it says on the box and not have the multiple outs that almost certainly most mentalists have, and go straight, or do you make sure that you're covered, so to speak?
Both in essence. In that there are a number of apparatus that can dig you out of any kind of situation that you would get into.
Right.
So primarily, I will go for exactly what I can within that area. So depending upon what clip you've watched, whether it was the pet name or a person's name or whatever it is, all names kind of function in the same way. If I can either get you to think about your name in a certain way, you know, without talking too much methodically about it, then I would know certain things. If I can get to one of the letters within there, like a first letter or a second letter, then I've spent a lot of time reading babies' name books. I mean, it helps when you come to memorizing names and faces. That it helps to have quick little mnemonics to draw into. So, you know a lot about where English names come from, where Portuguese names, Argentinian names, Serbian names, where all of these kinds of names have their origin. And if you can pick up from speaking to the person that they're from country X and have lived in country Y for so long, that would tell you certain things about their experiences and the kind of name that they might have for themselves.
Right.
So yeah, it's very much about taking a lot of the extraneous detail that most people don't tend to look at, and seeing how I can make that work for me. When you're dealing with English names, they are much more simple than everybody else on the planet. You know, when my name is Benjamin, you know, I'm christened Benjamin, but if you meet any other Ben on the streets, they are either a Ben or a Benjamin. They won't be called Benjamin, but you'll be able to call them Ben. And the like. So if I'm ever trying to figure out their name, Ben is easier to deal with than Benjamin. And let's say I guess that their name is Ben via whatever means that comes about at the time. They will very often go away telling the story that he figured my name out, and they will gift me as part of story and experience that I figured out that their name was Benjamin within that example. And that's kind of part of, you know, the Loftus experiments of questioning under distress within there that works for me in my kind of situations. So, but that's the gigs that I take. That's the performances that I enjoy. As you'll be aware, most of the arguments in the area that if you're being paid to get there, you should be able to put on a performance and this kind of thing. Right. But if I'm billing myself as somebody who uses Sherlockian practices and deductive methods and techniques within this area, then I better be able to do that, right? That feels quite disingenuous as a performance study to not do those kinds of things.
Well, at the risk of, you know, getting too nerdy into that area, that I'm sure not a lot of people have done the reading and so forth, but I'm curious if it doesn't give too much away, you know, the extent to which there must be a bridge here, because I'm thinking and I'm imagining and assuming, and I know assuming makes asses out of both of us, but you know, I'm imagining there's been some work. You mentioned already, you know, baby names and so forth, but you know, to what extent have you done that uber mentalist act of memorizing the most common names in 1965 versus the most common names in 1966, so that, you know, when you get that one clue, you're already doing the numbers of what most likely will be the first letter of their name, and then a little bit of anagram work that you've already memorized, etc. Like, are you going to that extent?
God, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The very first time I started to look at pet names, for example, because I always found it curious that humans give their pets names. I always kind of wondered what pets would call themselves and how they talk to each other. You know, animated movies make it look so easy, right? But there's very often a guiding light or a thought or a philosophy behind what behavior decides that this animal is going to be called whatever. Like my dog, I have two. I didn't get to name this one. She was already old enough when we got her, but my dog that I had since I was a puppy is called Cookie, and I named him Cookie because I'm a cookie monster. They are my kryptonite. If you're ever going to take me out, you give me some cookies, and then I'm done for a while. So that's why I named him Cookie, and it goes into that area. So I started to look at pet name censuses. I don't even know if that's a plural word. It might be sensi. I don't know. But I started to look at pet name censuses and memorizing these. And I got at one stage a list of 1,200 that I've managed to anagram out letter by letter that will give me certain examples within this area, so that, you know, shadow might lead me to silver, might lead me to serene, might lead me to other areas that, you know, have more kind of spiritual kind of background. And if I could figure out how they named the dog, what would that tell me about the person that named them? And it would lead me into different areas this way. What else have I done? The very first episode of my web series, I thought it would be fun to replicate, I suppose would be the best word, a kind of kidnap scene that comes out of the Sherlock Holmes stories. But I think that Robert Downey Jr. made it famous in the first film, where they put a hood over his head, they stick him in the back of a hansom cab, and he's memorizing right turns, left turns, smells, sights, sounds on the way. And you go, I wonder if that's possible. So I took my local A to Z for the city, and I memorized that. Took me a good few months to be able to memorize it all, like excellently. And then the kind of outline, I suppose, of the performance was, could I get into the boot of somebody's car, have them drive anywhere in the city, and the only way that they would let me out is if I could tell them categorically, you know, where we were, or what kind of street we were on, or what was around, that kind of thing, if they didn't stop on a street. Right. So yeah, I memorized the A to Z, which was close to 19,000 street names and grid references. That was pretty challenging. It very often it comes down to that for me. If there's information out there, how much of it can I cram into this? Right. For me to be able to use, you know, the nature of psychological study that goes on. There have been studies done into most things that you could think of, like when you come across the most commonly text people on somebody's phone. So if for some reason I catch a glimpse of the most recent calls and there's just some names on there, if I can memorize the names very quickly, can I read some kind of relationship to this person that they've just called within that area? You know, I went through a period when I first started of memorizing different key fobs, so that if I saw a different make and style of key, I would know what kind of car they drove, and depended upon where they were, what we were doing, I might know a little bit more about them. Or if I had time to go and walk around the car park outside, I'd have a little look to see what I could what I could remember and figure out within that area. So I'm quite happy to go to any lengths to do this. One of the first things that I created as an effect for other mentalists to do was a karaoke book. And there are a number of different mechanical ways to get at specifically thought of pieces of information that every mentalist includes as part of their performances. But most of the instructional booklet was taken up with how to memorize the book, because it's much easier to have somebody stop at a particular page and be able to see from where, you know, they kind of break apart the folds, what part of the book they're in, if you memorized it, so you already know the kind of genre that they're dealing with. Right. And to me that was more genuine as a performance style, because I felt like I'm using the skills that people were paying me to turn up to do. You know, it scares a lot of people because there is an error for margin. If you're familiar with the Pete Holmes sketch on Sherlock Holmes, it's Sherlock Sucks at Deduction, and they're kind of parodying the first scene from BBC Sherlock, in where he makes all these inferences about John Watson's phone, and John Watson goes, no. There's a very real possibility that can exist when you're performing, which puts a lot of people off, and then you get into those other kinds of debates. That thrills me beyond belief. So how can I control those kind of endeavors to make sure that what I'm performing, there's as minimal risk as possible? Because up here I've gone the extra mile to be able to do it. I mean, you'll know yourself that there are a number of even basic card tricks that work around I'm going to memorize this deck, and they'll go however many 30 seconds, whatever it takes as part of their performance. Whereas if you work very, very hard, granted, but if you work very hard, you can get to the stage where you could probably memorize a deck of cards in 30 seconds. There are some people that can do it in 12 seconds now, which is ridiculous and far beyond my capabilities. But there's that out there. Why would you not spend the time to be able to do that? So now I'm covered against grabby spectators, those who continually question me and shuffle them. They're in a set order. Oh, it's this. Oh, shuffle them there. Go on. Come back. Let's do it. So they can't question me anymore. They're on my side. I'm in control of from a spectator management perspective. That's in a nutshell, yes, would be the short answer.
So we'll get into some of these memory techniques and your knowledge of them. But it seems to me, before we do, there's this kind of spooky gray area, at least in my mind, because, and I don't know if you share it or not, and don't feel obliged to share it, but I'm more in the skeptic camp. So when I do any sort of mind reading stuff, I'm always no, 1,000 times no. This is all derived. There's no magic thing going on here, or psychic thing, or anything like that. It's all, you got there because, and if people really push me, I will show them whatever my multiple out was, because I don't want them going around believing nonsense. However, we're also talking here performance. Yeah, you make a mistake, you don't make a mistake, whatever. No harm, no foul at the end of the day. And there's many, many ways to incorporate a mistake later if you're fast on your feet. And then the magician in trouble kind of stuff pays off in the end. But when you take it into detection, though, you've got potentially information that could put someone on the stand, and just being in an interview room with police is some scary stuff, right? So how do you square that in terms of your operation when you're advising? And you may well have, it wouldn't be a progressive anagram, but you may have all this, or maybe it would, I don't know, but you may have all this sort of knowledge and so forth. But now, I mean, this is pay dirt. This is someone's life, right? And so you're going, I noticed this ring, and obviously that ring is from the 50s, and that would suggest blah blah blah, and that could be, just a little bit too much that leads to a poor consequence for some innocent person. How do you deal with that in your mind, or is it not a factor in how you're approaching actual investigation?
It kind of differs, it depends on the kind of investigation you're in, or the kind of people that you're working with. But for me, I'm straight across the board, on all of it. Like when it comes to the performance of the stuff, I'm like, if you ask me how it's done, I'll tell you. There's no kind of secret there. But you're absolutely right in terms of the difference. The stakes are wildly changed. So that when I come to write up my report, it's a case of you've seen X that's led you to Y that means Z. But here is the backup from it. Here is the reasoning. Here is the studies. Here is the information. Here is the things that you can base your conclusion on in reality that is unquestioned, that can be proven in a court of law, which differ dependent from country to country. As I say, it depends on whoever you're working with within that area. But when I'm asked to consult, very often people have sent, it's difficult to talk about it without having the people that wrote the NDAs dive out of a secret wall somewhere and arrest me. But very often when I'm sent stuff, it's not even original documents. It's photos of photos, and it's replicated video footage. So like part of my breakdown will be, I've seen these behaviors interact, which can lead to these kinds of situations arising. And if you see behavior X, Y, and Z when you're actually speaking to them, then it would lead to this kind of information and the like. So it's kind of a framework for them to go down, because I'm working remotely a lot of the time. Not all of the time, I grant you, but a lot of the time I'm working remotely. So you have to account for the fact that you're not in the room. Right. At all. It's a very different situation, us having a conversation this way versus us having a conversation in reality. There is a number of different things to consider, even if we are talking from, the same kind of room setup, like an office or a shared space or a coffee shop or something like this. If it's done differently, then it would mean different things. And I would go the extra mile as part of my reports to make whoever it is that reads these understand my position and where I'm coming from, because I'm very often asked to look at things that people will push to one side as being irrelevant. And I kind of operate under the mantra that everything is relevant until it's not. Right? Because everything has a motivation and a creation behind it. If you look hard enough, there's something there. Whether it's relevant or not depends upon your specific purpose. It might be that you're looking at the jewelry of somebody in the suspect room, in the interview room, and it will tell you all manner of information about their family. But is that particularly pertinent to a murder investigation or a robbery investigation? Right. Probably not. Dependent upon 90% of cases, after all. So that's where I have to draw the line, because in performance you can be much more, fanciful and flourishy about what it is, because it's about the spectacle. When you're dealing with the influence that you can have over people's lives, as you rightly state, it's an entirely different kettle of fish. So you have to back everything up with information that can be categorically proven, or at the very least provide them with a scientific background or a basis in the reason that you think these things, so you can cast reasonable doubt that would lead other detectives and interviewers and people within the legal system to question these in a way that they are allowed to be able to question, and then get new information. That new information would then come back to me, which would lead down different paths. Because if you're dealing with like the first set of details in whatever case that you're brought, it's very often surface based. Right. There's a number of different lines and elements that would require further work and further detail. So you get those back, and then it perhaps shows the original the original story in a new light within that area. So you have to revisit the original, filing this one into it before you put on your end report. So as much as I like to think that I consider every aspect when it comes to performance, it really has to be done if you're ever going to go, look, this is my thoughts, my findings, go and have them influence somebody's life. That's a hell of a thing to consider, and such a responsibility, just from a human level. If you don't do the work, if you don't do the legwork, right, you're, regardless of what side of the system you fall on, you're going to be doing someone a disservice. And you cannot do that. You can't do it.
Well, I'm glad to hear these things. I mean, I would have assumed that, but just kind of wanted to hear it from the source.
Absolutely.
And I'm quite a fan of some crime fiction stuff. I took many years off, more than a decade off, but then I came back to it and I was like, wow, what have I been doing here? And it's such fantastical stuff. You see the influence of Sherlock on so many stories and so forth. But if you look into the history of crime and detection and how that fingerprints come into being and so forth. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and I don't know enough about Sherlock as such, but I think that they're quite divided. And I don't quite see the influence. I see more influence of Oedipus Rex on modern detection than I do Sherlock, but I mean, I would love to hear your take on it. What is it in Sherlock that inspires and guides, if there is something pedagogical there that leads directly to what you're doing? Have I missed it?
No. I think that's the thing with fictional elements. They're all interpretive, right? They all mean different things to different people,
right?
But like when you look at the influences that he has had on some of the people within the forensic field, you can take it back as far as Edmund Locard, who created Locard's exchange principle, which is still used in forensic science today, in terms of those objects that have an interaction with one another. One will leave their impress. Although
there are some brutal cases where that didn't.
There are. There are. But his original work within that area was started by Sherlock Holmes. And I think in terms of the modern day applications of it, there are more and more people starting to go, well, this might be relevant, versus going, this is no basis in what I'm doing, without questioning it further.
Right.
I think that is the seed that, at least for my two pennies, it's probably biased anyway, given how I've been obsessed with the stories for so long. But I think that's where it comes from in terms of the Sherlockian influence. I mean, it could go back even further to Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin, I think it was, or Dupin. I forget how sweet irony. I forget how it was pronounced. But yeah, I for me, that's where the elements come from, because these kind of the genius detective fictional roles were those that look at things that other people just went, oh, that'll never do me a solid in terms of information to carry my investigation further.
Right.
These were the people that went, okay, here is everything that happened in a room. Can I explain it all first of all? And then those elements that I can explain, what is relevant to what's going on? How does that cause a chain of events that lead to this? Does it? Well, no. Does this? Okay, yeah. So we'll put that in and see how it makes the end kind of situation look within this area. And that was the main influence for Sherlockian enterprises within the real world. Dare I say it, within that area, at least for myself. Anyway. And more the people that I get to work with within this industry, I'm starting to see that they do it too. Whether they did it before or not, I have no idea. That's just because I'm moving more and more into that side as well. So I deal with more and more of these people now on a daily basis, and you see the people that are looking at shoe studies, cigarette studies, some of these things that have a quintessentially kind of Sherlockian feel about them. There are those aspects being considered, and there are more and more people looking to do with this what modern misconceptions would put down to a computer or a machine to be able to do for you.
Right.
When you look at something with as many kind of sordid tales of false reads about them as lie detection, and you look at the origin of the polygraph or face reading and Ekman's work, people are questioning the movements and the veracity behind these kinds of modus operandi, and rightly so, because that leads to a more truthful way, if you'll excuse the pun, of reading people properly to obtain exactly what went on behind their motivations, as opposed to going, this dial twitched in a certain way, so it means certain things.
Right.
But even the lie detector, wasn't it William Moulton Marsden that originally put out the first blueprint for that kind of device, which has as much science behind it as the lasso of truth from Wonder Woman?
Well, I don't know the full history, but I wonder how it ties to some of the subvocalization studies, which we could talk about as well with speed reading.
100%.
Because that has a very pseudoscientific background as well. But you do talk about certain things on your site related to that. So we can get into that. But before we dive off on this, I want to just something you said about, people interpret Sherlock differently. That's quite interesting to me because there's an argument in philosophy that fictional characters are real. And one of the evidences for that is interpretation. So, I am now interpreting you in a different way than I had the opportunity to interpret you when I was on your show, right? And there are many, many people who are going to interpret you in many, many different ways. And certainly as YouTube channel people, we know that there's all kinds of people who interpret us in different ways, right? So what's the difference between, some human out there interpreting real people in a variety of ways, a polysemy of interpretations, and someone doing that with a fictional figure? I mean, do you have thoughts about that? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's real, but rather the status of realness when it is subject to interpretation. Interpretation is real, and then it's interpretation about what? Nothing? No, it's about something. Otherwise, there's no interpretation.
Yeah, I love it. It's the philosophical chicken and the egg debate. I think what it boils down to, at least when you're casting aspersions on other people based upon whatever kind of information you base it on, it's more important to know yourself in terms of where you're coming from. Because within that area, you are better equipped to know if you're speaking from any place of bias or potential bias to your interpretation of the surroundings or the people or the stories that you're looking at. It would be like saying to somebody, could you read a fictional story written by O.J. Simpson or Charles Manson?
I think he wrote a fictional story.
Did he? Brilliant. I mean, I know that Charles Manson plays a lot of music, and if you listen to his songs objectively, they're good songs. They're good songs within that area. He's got quite a skilled set of fingers on the guitar. That's a debate for another day. Right. That's interpretation within that area. If I can comfortably state that my interpretations of these people are based in an irrefutable reality of their behavioral conduct, then their ability to write a story has no effect over my enjoyment of it. Within that area. So like when it comes to reading people, for example, I've not had this situation, but it's a very far right kind of situation to be in, but every chance could occur that it might arise. As a father, could I objectively read a sex offender that's sat across the other side of the table from me? Right. Could I objectively do that? And that for me is where interpretation differs. It's more about knowing myself and how I'm interpreting the story that's in front of me, whatever kind of reality basis that it comes from, which is why I spend a lot of my time reading about Stoicism and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and these wonderfully insightful people that lead you into these applications into modern life, becoming so entangled within a bias of one thing over another that can lead you to see your reality in a way that isn't completely truthful. It was one of the things that I put at the start of the monographs to discuss it. There was a photo of this huge guy with a huge beard, and he's got his Hell's Angels leathers on, and I'd cropped the photo specifically, but if you did it from a frame, all you'd kind of get was this area of his arms reaching down, he's kind of looking down in this way, and you can just see the furrowed eyebrows. And so I spoke about at the start, you can see the size of him. He's covered in tattoos, clearly an alternative guy. What is he doing? And then you talk to some people, you might be picking up tools or plotting this and this, and you hear about other people's biases that influence what's actually going on in the picture. And then you show them the whole one, and he's just bending down to pick up his son. The strain on his face was from the weight of picking up another human within this area, and that changes the whole light of that. And for me, that's where these differ, in that if you look at the immutable elements of, like, a Sherlock Holmes story, for example, there is a guy who's in pursuit of information that can help to solve a case by any means necessary. And then how you interpret that depends upon any particular biases that you have. People might deem his conduct at a scene quite arrogant or cold, but there are those that might deem it as, well, he's just forgetting that which doesn't matter and focusing on that which does. In these kind of things, people might enjoy the sensationalism of it, because there is no doubt a high degree of sensationalism within the stories themselves. But people might also enjoy peeling back the history to see where these kind of historical influences had an effect on Conan Doyle, and how he chose to blend the two over within the area. And if you read some of his other works, like the Boer War, for example, there's the Boer War was a thing that happened, and to read about it in such a sensationalized way was a great story. But like you look at some of the influences for Holmes, you could talk about Jerome Caminada, for example, which was a particular Manchester-based detective who used like a disguise to be able to solve certain things, and was involved in several kind of high-profile mysteries at that time, which might tell you a little bit about my biases in terms of how I'm telling the story, as most of mine circles back to Sherlock Holmes being this quote-unquote real character. But that's where it comes from for me. The difference between the two is much more about knowing yourself and where your own emotional influences come from that could color one thing in one way, when in actual fact it's another. Like when you sit down after a hard day's work and you're supposed to be doing some exercise or some training or whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing as part of whatever lifestyle you're leading, and you sit down and you go, are you really that tired? Or is it just because that's how you're sitting, and is how you're sitting influencing your thoughts? It's Ouroboros, it's the snake eating itself. I mean, where does that one start? So you break that cycle, and you might be able to see that particular reality in a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
So that gets into self-inquiry and knowing yourself. What did you do to come to know yourself better, so that you might perhaps have a better sense of the fiction that you are, as opposed to the truth that you are?
Well, as I say, Stoicism influences my life greatly, and it comes down to the if I'm going to be there for other people, I must first be able to be there for myself, and know my own truths and know my own shortcomings and pitfalls, just as where my own attributes lie, to know what I can and can't do. And there's not been a magic pill to take with that for me, at least. It's been more about exploration within these fields that led me to work in brainwave study, and I found quite a lot of. That's not to say that there's nothing that questions against it, because there is. But I've found quite a lot of things that work for me within the self-reflective elements in terms of the five major brainwave states that we all experience in certain days, being the betas, the alphas, the ASMRs, the thetas, and the deltas within that area. So we're all functioning at different electronic cycles per second. And if I'm functioning too fast for a particular scenario within this area, there's a misalignment between body and mind. So I'm missing something. So there's some kind of bias there that's stopping me, whether it be an emotional or not. There's something stopping me from connecting to what's going on in a wave state that meets the actual truth of the scenario. So I started to explore, okay, so if there really is this relationship between body and mind, in that me, when I experience a high degree of joy and elation, I become quite childlike. So if I was experiencing elation while sat down, my go-to tell is I start kind of bouncing within my chair like a little child. So if there's all these kinds of behavioral signs that I have about myself, what am I saying to myself when I clench my fist? What is the underlying thoughts and drivers behind that is driving whatever speed of brainwave state that I'm in at that moment, that is stopping me from functioning? And if I'm consciously aware of this, can I physically change that to have more of an effect on my ability to perceive the environment in a different way, or at least the way that it's actually being shown to me, rather than through some filter that I'm putting up there myself? And that's where a large proportion of my work goes to. And it was first brought about, my interest in this area, by Dominic O'Brien, who experimented with functioning in different brainwave states for his ability to memorize things. And he found that the slower that you encourage your brainwave states to be, the more that you are capable of dealing with. So that led me into this area of, okay, if I can't function in a particular environment because, maybe my freeze, fight, or flight is engaged, maybe it's a terrifying scenario, how can I take physical control of that emotional manifestation to try and put me in the best possible legs for being able to deal with it, And so I looked at all manner of work within that area. I think there's a great book called I think it's called The High Powered Mind, or The High Performance Mind, or something like this, that specifically looks at the way brainwaves can influence your emotional output within this area.
Right.
And it comes back to that work in memory. If I've got a more clear mind, then I'm able to focus on whatever it is that I need to memorize. There's not this little voice that's in my head going, pay attention to me. I'm going to tell you that there's 5 seconds left on the clock. I'm going to tell you that this other person finished a while ago. And instead of focusing on what it actually is that I should be doing. That's where a large proportion of my work came from. I have, as part of my journey, had several therapists and counselors as well, given my own personal emotional damage. I've been off and on with insomnia and several kind of brain swelling concerns. Have led me to have these experienced professionals help me and shine lights in certain areas that I need them to be shone on. But yeah, when it comes to my own work, that's where I've found a lot of truth, almost, to how my own misalignment might happen that stops me from functioning in the most optimal way possible.
Well, one of the tropes in crime fiction is the detective becoming like the criminal that is under investigation. So state management is pretty key. And, the one that comes to mind is Red Dragon, or I think the movie Manhunter brings it out the best of all the versions of just how thinking through that criminal can bring you closer and closer to being that person, yourself. And the final scene of Manhunter is just the creepiest thing ever put on celluloid, as far as I can remember. So in terms of getting this baseline for your brain states, you wired yourself up, or how did you figure that out?
Yeah, I started with the wiring myself up, because I used to go to sleep clinics and the like during my insomnia days, when they would put me out and try and figure out where my scar tissue was coming from. Thankfully, those are more infrequent these days, which led me to me questioning them. You're awake for a long time. You would talk about a lot of things, and they would register these different experiences for me. But then I started to look at the neuroscientific work of now I've never heard his second name said out loud, so I might mispronounce this. It's Benjamin Libet or Libet, or I don't know, Libet. Libet, yeah. Perfect. So I started to look at his work as well, which influenced my ability to question myself and whether I'm perceiving the realities of a situation, sans electronic influence, in that, if my body's already reacting to something, the thoughts to it have happened a while ago. So that led to me being able to reverse engineer this kind of emotional influence that my brain was having on my body, and therefore my performance within a particular area. So nowadays, with me doing as much work on the emotional reasoning that I have, and it's very much a case of exposure. Like if I've ever watched a film or a TV show that's moved me. And nowadays it's anything with dogs in. Like I watched the first episode of Turner and Hooch on Disney Plus the other day, of all things, and I was in a state. I was in an absolute state, because as soon as you bring a dog into the arena, I'm done. That's why most people can't stand the movie series John Wick. I love it. If anybody was to do that to my dog, largely the same things would happen. But that's more about my influence. But when I have something that experiences me, that moves me within that area, as soon as it's finished, I might pick up a deck and memorize it, or at least attempt to. Anyway, to see how I can function within that area. I might try and read something that I'm working on. I might look at my body to see, okay, what am I actually doing within this area? And I'll make physical, actual notes of what I'm doing within this area. So I've got this kind of dictionary almost of my own emotional output. Might be a good word within this area, so that if I'm more aware of this information that's being put out there, I can go, okay, this isn't particularly relevant at this moment. Maybe I'm not functioning in the best way. And if I'm not functioning in the best way, I'm missing things that are going on that are going to be important, because I'm too locus of control this way. It needs to be more this way within this area.
Right.
These are very much it's much more granular. I suppose it might be the best way of describing it, that my study comes from these days in terms of self-reflection, because those years of being hooked up to a machine quite regularly gave me those kinds of differentiating patterns to look for moving forward. Because there's one thing to experience something so high powered, and there is to see the data behind it. It becomes, okay, I can learn from these kinds of scenarios. It's much more of an outside influence to reflect on within that area. Like I know when I start getting into a topic too far, that I start to become quite animated, and I get quite zany almost with my movements. And I can really start to talk, and my sentences will go on for about 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 words. So I would know then, if I'm ever experiencing one of those moments, to go, oop, bring it back in, slow it down. There we go. Now we're functioning. Now I can see the way that everything's moving properly in the space and time of this reality at that particular moment. So yeah, that's probably much more where my work is on that reflective journey these days.
So for people who aren't going to be able to get a device, do you have, to track and get the data and see it? Do you have any ideas or suggestions where they can start with state analysis and then use whatever they find there to help with state management?
Absolutely. I would take stock of the moments in which you experience them, which is very difficult to do at the first stage. So, which is why I initially write down certain, kind of stock experiences that are designed to make you think and feel and act in certain ways. Keep it as a kind of journal of experiences, because when you're looking at these kind of situations fresh without any kind of influence or training, it's like trying to remember a dream. At times it's very difficult to do because you're already looking at the situation back through a filter. Anyway, in terms of your experiences. So I would say to people like, what were you doing the last time you stood in a queue for an hour? What were you doing the last time that you shouted at somebody, if you've ever done that? What were you doing the last time that you experienced a full, hearty belly laugh at something? And these kind of stock moments that we've all experienced to a certain degree throughout our lives.
Right.
What was I physically doing within that area? And then the more exposure to these kind of stock lines I'd get, I'd look at the transition. Like it might be that the first time I was experiencing a full belly laugh, it might be that I was quite kind of this way around, because if I speak from personal experience, this way around because I was very initially embarrassed about my teeth as a youngster, because I've got quite a big gap between the bottom ones. Skateboarding accident, I knocked all 4 of them out and only 3 grew back, so it's grown with a gap. I don't care as much these days, but when I was a teen, I used to experience laughter like this way. So and then the more that I grew, I experienced laughter this way, in terms of keeping people away from me in this kind of bubble. And I noticed that my bubble kind of grew and grew and grew and grew the more that I was laughing, the more that I was enjoying positive experiences. What does that tell me about my own journey that I've gone on within this area of how I might experience joy as an adult now? I might experience joy as a welcoming endeavor, unafraid to be that vulnerable around other people. I have this information so that if I experience an interview, let's say, with somebody that is quite charismatic or ridiculously attractive, something that might make me feel quite positive in some way, and I start to open up more to them, and I become aware of this, am I behaviorally quite critically aware of the situation? No. And it all comes back to this journaled experience, and through that journaled experience you become critically aware of your own emotional shifts and where the intonation, where the color lies, because it's literally quite there in black and white in front of you, or blue and white if you're using a blue pen. But for example, that's where I would encourage people to start, because if you're going to pull apart your own emotional awareness, that's very difficult to do without somebody there telling you this is how you behave, or a machine telling you this is how you behave. So it started like as ridiculous of carrying a notebook around with me everywhere I went as a 16, 17-year-old. That's socially awkward to do, but I did it because I wanted the information at the time. So if I went to a nightclub, for example, and I've done this before, I'd order my drinks. And if it ever get to the stage where, I 17, 18, at least in the UK anyway, you're always on the verge of being ID'd, and it's almost social prison for you to be in if you're under 17, but you still get ID'd within this area. And then I'd make notes of what my body's doing in this nervous state, what my body's doing, to convey certain things about my behavior within this, whether it's my behavior that led to influence this person to ID, and I gave myself away within that area. The amount of information that these journals gave to me about my own comportment in life was huge, and that would be the most beneficial experience that I would share with somebody. Just make a note of it, no matter how little, no matter how seemingly insignificant it is. You know, whether it's you experience joy by slapping your hand down on a table like some eccentric individuals do.
No,
write it down.
That's great advice, and it's super interesting because I sometimes hold a webinar or a seminar or whatever, online web seminar, whatever you want to call it, called the configuration. And the configuration goes into dramatic situations that you have in life. And if you can memorize them, then you get, just like this little codex, and you start to go, oh, this kind of situation that life presents. And, I'm quite influenced by narratology and all kinds of things, and knowing it's more than the hero's journey. It's literally like Vladimir Prop's morphology of the folktale, and seeing how that stuff plays out on a day-to-day basis. So I'm totally with you on that. Brilliant. And that's a segue for us to maybe think, if you're going to write down all these notes and then you see the patterns and you could name them yourself, this is sad body language, or this is, the gesture that gets me ID'd or whatever, then you can memorize them. So let's talk a little bit about how you approach memorization. And again, I don't want to go on the assumption thing, but yeah, I assume the tools are quite similar, but what are your favorite go-to memory techniques?
So nowadays, if I'm forced to have to memorize a scene and objects within a scene, I very much start out with just something as simple as linking. I exacerbate its ridiculousness within the particular field that it's in, and then I look at my journey throughout the room as I experience it. So if I were to speak about this room, it would be the Mac, and then the bookcase, and then my wedding flowers, and then another bookcase, and the dogs, and all of these other details that are over there. And I'd be linking one to the next, so that when I had to recreate it later, I would get all of these objects that came along with it, of what was in the room and how to deal with these kind of scenarios. But from the kind of extraneous events of, like, when you're memorizing playing cards, it might be the King of Hearts that you recall, but you could ultimately draw the King of Hearts afterwards. Same thing is of these scenes as I'm recalling them. My experience within this kind of scenario brings along additional data as a result. And if I am needing to keep it for a while, I will do my best to store it in a palace of some sorts. Right. Given as much as I would try and store within my palace, it just means that I get involved in as many different techniques as possible, because if I'm in a different emotional state that day, it might require a different technique for me to be able to use. I might be feeling much more analytical and much more lazy at the same time. So I need something that's specifically guided towards every single detail, but is a lot easier to do than linking, for example. So I might just grab an object and store it in a particular space that I'd set out in the palace, and carry on about my day, so that I can analyze it later. Right. So yeah, my bread and butter would be things like would be linking and pegging in those kind of areas, number substitutions, word substitutions for languages, and this kind of thing. But yeah, it comes back to memory palaces for me. Memory palaces, and more recently, over the last 6-7 years, these Aboriginal practices, in terms of the more ancient memory methods that I've found very, very useful in terms of their applicability.
So, for example,
song lines.
Right.
Song lines, for example. My stag do, my bachelor party, is coming up towards the end of the week, and I wanted to be able to navigate London in a way that is at least conducive to a bachelor party environment. So I stored the London Underground on a songline, along the Muse album Origin of Symmetry, so that now, if I even become somewhat inebriated over the state, I will be able to sing the songs, and I will still at least know where I'm going within this area. So song lines within this area. When I first started to look at dog breeds, for example, that was the thing that first geared me to create my first Lucasa, my first memory board. Right. And I love the different ways that these memory techniques get you to inhabit different levels of information, because to me, on my experience, that's what it's about. If you're going to memorize it, recall it, whatever word you want to use, a rose by any other name and all that, that's the modus operandi in there. And it's a lot like having a toolbox. You can't always use a spanner to put a screw into a wall, that kind of thing. So the more aware I am of different memory techniques that there are, the better suited I am to anything that I might need to memorize within this area.
Take this into it a little bit. I'm not sure I understand. So when you have a song that you want to remember and you're matching it somehow to the underground, so is it that the first line is in a particular station, King's Cross or something like this, and then the next line is in the next station, or how does this work?
So what I did within this, that's not traditionally how songlines works. Songlines were the created performance driven towards words and movements and dance and patterns that would go towards lineage or movement of one tribal area to another, this kind of thing. So how I kind of redid that within my interpretation of it, because interpretation being different things to different people, I love to play music. Right. I'm not as much of a fan of the lyrics as other people. I listen to the drum beats. I listen to the change of sounds and instruments that go on, because that's where my interests lie. So that when I took the Muse album Origin of Symmetry, one of my favorite albums of all time, I just changed the words to a sung out version of linked images over the top of the song, so that now when I sing the song in my car, as I enjoy doing as a solitary endeavor, because nobody needs to hear me sing, I get a top up of this kind of information for free, and it's not just a cerebral journey in there. It's in my body. It's in the music that I'm tapping because I'm playing air drums on my car, and I'm getting involved in all this. And I'm singing about we go, if we do the Bakerloo line, for example, you go Harrow and Wealdstone, Kenton, South Kenton, Wembley Central, Wembley North, Stonebridge Park. I mean, you won't know if you're not from the area. From Stonebridge Park, you go down to Harlesden, Willesden Junction, and all I'm doing in my head now is I'm just singing the lines of the song, which has always become easier. Everybody knows at least some of the words to "We Will Rock You" or "Thriller" or these kind of huge songs that exist. Why can't I turn those into mnemonic devices for me to be able to use to get information wherever, whatever kind of state that I'm in? That's the way I kind of interpreted them.
Is this the Wimbledon down by Lily Road somewhere in Harlesden?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
that's the one.
It works.
That's the one. Yeah,
it shot through the waves over to me. Well, we'll go spare the story why I know that particular area, but in any case, it's a good one. Yeah, so I mean, I can see how that works. That's great, and in some sense, that's how I memorized my Sanskrit. Except for I'm using the actual song or the tune that is actually sung with the words. So I haven't changed the words to go with a song. But there are Christopher Huff was on the podcast many years ago, and he did this with prepositions. And he just took a tune and memorized all the prepositions in this particular tune. I don't recall what the actual thing was. It was a very common classical sort of American thing, I believe. But in any case, I mean, we all sort of adopt these things, and it's great to hear that example. I haven't quite heard it matched to the actual, progress through the underground. I always think of it, but it's the tube, or however you call it there in London.
It's same thing.
Both.
Tube, metro, whatever. Right. Trains underneath the floor. That'll do.
So when you talk about linking, I mean, you gave an example of your apartment there. How is that different than the memory palace? You mentioned these objects over here, over there.
Yeah.
You think of it differently than the memory palace, or you don't see linking as different than the memory palace, or I don't know. How does that work?
I think of them all as different, separate things. So my memory palace houses different journeys that I go on, different stories that I've linked together, different collections of information that I would need, because I needed a way to categorize the mass of things that I wanted to go through within that area. So when I looked at the initial kind of palace and the like, you start reading about the works of Matteo Ricci and all of these kind of experiences within that area. I looked at a building that I would know well in the standard kind of form, but that would have a specific layout or a specific structure to it. So I used my old high school and my old college, because if I needed any art-based information, I don't have to go on an extra journey. I can be in the art building. If I needed anything from history, and it fell into this way. And each as you'll know from going to school yourself, each school itself doesn't just have one room per subject. There are many. And given that this is a cerebral building, I can change the structure in any way that I like within its initial foundation. So that's where the memory palace came from. And then any journeys that I would go on that I needed information that has an order to, for example, whether I'm memorizing historical events or orders of prime ministers, like I did recently was kind of cheating at a pub quiz. I memorized a few pub quiz trivia books. It was great. I won, but that was the kind of thing that I did anyway. When I needed that kind of cause and effect thing to it, I would store them on journeys, because the journey gave me that one after the other scenario. And I put those in my geography department, with geography being the store of locations and whatever. There's maps and DVDs and books and all kinds of things within this area. The linking themselves, I term as more temporary.
All right.
Because it is the objects themselves that link to the next object that links to the next object. And I might get a reboot of the information if somebody mentions an object again in the future, and I might get this linking thing happen. But ultimately, if it's temporary, I don't need it, so I don't really want to store it anywhere. With all of them, you could argue that one of the it's all linking back to information in some way, but that's where I at least determine the difference myself for my own rationale of how I use the information that I need to. It helps to have these kind of differing examples and different subsets for me to be able to know what kind of information I need and to get at it quickly. So like there was a point that I remembered the day for any week in the past few hundred years, the theorem that goes along with that. Right. And I stored it in the office of my memory palace, mostly because that's where you go if you need dates and information and bookings and things. You go to the office, right? And so that's where I needed that. So every time that I needed to know where I was going or what I was doing on a certain date, I used to book gigs months, sometimes years on advance if it was a wedding, but I'd book them all through here because of the journey that I had created around the office environment in my memory palace. And it was just a lot easier to have these differing techniques that would allow me to get at different information, but quickly, because that's invariably what I needed it for. When it comes to competitions and the like, and I've only ever done 2 in my life. I'm not as experienced at competitions as anybody else. So I'd got a specific set of journeys that I would go on, that that I would use specifically for competition. So they would never be entangled with anything else that I would use. So I would know that if I was mapping out a room, and it was only a room that I needed to give a deductive reading if it was a performance, or if I needed to recall it later for paperwork or whatever it was, I would store it as links, and I get this recreated development. I would know not to put this information, this linked story, in one of these other journeys that I've saved for competitions. But the way that I store them is much like the way that people store DVDs or books, for example. Right. You know, I bet if somebody asked you if you'd got this book, you would know. Probably you've never taken the time to actually memorize your entire book stock, but you would know based on your experience of it, and you would know from looking at the cover what looking at the spine, what the front cover looks like, or what the first couple of pages might start, and the trains of thought that might begin. And that's how I stored the different journeys that I would need. I would pull them out like little DVDs, and they have their own kind of mnemonic front covers that I go, oh, okay, so we're going on this journey, and then that leads me to this area and this area and this area and this area. Right. Yeah, that helped with the expanse of information that I needed, because it needed to come from a lot of different areas. So I needed to have a way to sort it all out. And that's not to say that it's the best one. That was the one that worked for me the most. It was the one that worked for me, in at least in terms of my own experience and interpretation of the information that I would encounter on a
let's talk about that, because so many people unfortunately get into perfectionism with the arts of memory. And is there a best? I mean, I don't know, maybe you do have an ideal of the best organizational system, and you're working for it, and you'll crack the code for all people. But obviously you just use what you got, and you found the thing that's there. But how do you advise people who have, which I'm sure you could detect faster than I can, have a sense of that unrealistic perfectionism, and it's holding them back from just getting started? What's your advice for that?
There was I don't know who wrote the speech, but it finished with Benedict Cumberbatch screaming into a microphone, "Stop thinking and just do." And those kind of experiences will stop you from understanding what works and what doesn't. Like, if you're so concerned with the benefit of one technique over the other, you've not really experienced the one technique to the sufficient degree, at least for my two pennies. So it's as much about exploration as it is about the aim for perfection. Because on the surface, there's nothing wrong with wanting that kind of quintessentially perfect memory. You'll be disappointed a lot, but there's nothing on the surface wrong with that. But only if it prevents you from experiencing everything else that's out there. It's a lot like going, when I'm drinking a coffee, this is the only kind of coffee bean I want. It's making me feel amazing. It's doing the trick. I will only ever drink this kind of coffee in the morning. So the next time I'm feeling tired and whatever, and they don't have my kind of coffee, am I just going to sit there and stew in silence? No, I'm going to experience the other one. The same thing is said of memory work, because as much as, at least I try to pretend I'm not. I am human. I function in very much the same way a human does, and not like the robot I try and aim to be at times.
You're not really Cookie Monster?
No, maybe that's just more my alias. I can go through a packet of biscuits like nobody's business. But yeah, within that area, I would look to experience these different things, because that's going to provide me with more understanding of the techniques. And so, like, the next time I'm feeling particularly lethargic, do I want to be going on this big, wonderfully splendiferous, magnificent journey through an illustrious kind of Edwardian building through of lights. No, I just want to link everything together. And I would only know about that through my experience of both within this area. I take a very combative standpoint when it comes to the memory arts, as it were, in terms of its applicability towards real life within this example. And I looked at the work of Bruce Lee as an influence. Forget what your opinions are of the man. His philosophy on combat was to experience many things and to find out what works for you. But when it works for you, let's put it in trainers and tracksuit bottoms so you're comfortable to practice, but then let's put it in pit boots, then let's put it in a suit and let's see how it works in that kind of environment. The same thing is for me with mnemonics and memorization. There is a place for memory palace and intimate detailed storage, but is that when you're driving? Is that when you're reading a person? Is that when you're doing? Arguably, the techniques are going to differ, and you're going to be better suited to more things that you have to memorize by knowing or at least experiencing different degrees of techniques, because then you get to go, well, I've experienced all this. There will, in the way that I live my life, there will probably never come a situation where I'm going to actively look to create my own Lukasa or my own wamping belt or knit string together in the way that the Inuits used to do. So I won't focus as much on those areas. I'll focus more on these areas because I can memorize as I'm going, or whatever reason there is behind it for you to do that. That's my opinions on this topic. I can only be better suited if I've experienced more. Like, how can I develop my opinions on something as incendiary as religion, for example, if I at least haven't experienced a lot of them, and I did my due diligence. I went to church for years. I read the Bible. I've read the English version of the Torah and the Quran and the Book of Mormon and all of these other things to try and get to grips with what's out there. So the more I'm to grips with what's out there, you introduce yourself as a Sikh, for example, and you're a deeply religious person by your own admission. I would know a lot of information about you already because I've experienced this area, and that's it's more of a mantra, I guess, towards life. I try and live it as open as possible towards techniques. So there's no quintessentially best one. It's just what's better for you in your own sphere of focus, in your own sphere of work, or your own intellectual differences.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm not a religious person either, but you remind me of the great proverb. I think it's 18:13, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. And we have a huge problem in the atheist community and the skeptic community, is that they do a whole lot of answering before that they've listened. And I always think of Christopher Hitchens, who learned a lot from the Bible that he didn't want to accept, and he could quote it from memory. And that was the cutting edge, So yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because there's due diligence to be paid even in the things we don't like. And that's part of and that's what Bruce Lee would say, I guess. It's like, can you go and talk to the preacher in their own language or not?
That's the other thing. That's why I started to look at languages. I've come to them quite late, but that's one of the other reasons why I started to, because how can I seek to read a person from this culture if I don't know what the hell you're on about right. At times, or your experience of growing up within that area, at least understanding a bit more about your culture in terms of growth and society and that kind of thing. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
What languages are you studying?
I'm currently studying French, German, Arabic, and Chinese. Wow. And I've always been a kind of 0 to 60 kind of guy, and with, I mean, that works for me. It's not to say that it's quite daunting, or it's just it is what it is. That works for me, because I'm awake for a lot longer than the average person anyway, so I may as well capitalize on it if I actually am. Right. So yeah, I really started to focus on them all when the first lockdown started in the UK, which was 15 months ago now, something like that. Right. So yeah, I try and keep in my daily practice as much as possible there, and my other half is trying to get me to learn Spanish because she wants to go to Spain for our honeymoon, and I'm like, that might be one too many at the moment. That's one too many. Right. But yeah, it was a lot of fun because at least in my experience, my first kind of dipping the toe into the water of language learning was, here are the top 625 most spoken words. Here are the top most 1,000 words. Okay, this is a memory competition. I could do this. I could do this in an hour, and I would go through that. But there's obviously a world of difference between memorizing them and speaking them. So at least if I had them up here, I could begin to try and conjugate and put this word with this word and see how this interacted in this kind of environment. The thing that lets me down, especially with Mandarin, is my tones, because given my training, I'm quite bassy and I find it difficult to make these kind of tonal changes between them. So that's why I spend more of my language learning time on programs like italki, for example, so I can at least practice the speaking. You know, the putting the information up here is fine. It's getting it out of my mouth that that is the real rub in that scenario.
I'll have to send you a title. I'm reading Sherlock Holmes in Mandarin right now. So I think it's Juanfa Gongsi de something. I haven't memorized the title yet, but it's the case of the curly-haired office or something like this.
Brilliant.
I should memorize the title. I just got it the other day, but it's readable, and you can the actual company that puts it together does a nice thing. They always have a gray line under the characters' names, and then they have just blue lines under the key vocabulary that you're going to be tackling for that sort of reading experience. Anyway,
brilliant.
It's tones are a thing. I mean, I live with a Mandarin speaker, and every day all I hear is tones.
Yeah.
So but I think it's beautiful to be able to study more than one language at the same time, if you can fit it in. For sure.
Agreed. Like that was my thoughts on it. Like, if I am comfortable with 10 minutes, for example, being able to do 30 words, right? And we all get the same 24 hours in a day. So instead of watching the next episode in this TV series that's usually about 40 to 45 minutes, can I put that 40 to 45 minutes into 15 to 20 words from each language? And then can I use them throughout the course of that day? Can I, the next time I walk past a car, what is it in this language? What is it in this language? And that's just when I'm walking the dog, for example. And that's the way that these mnemonic devices ultimately benefit, well, me, but you know, the generalized you within that area, in terms of your ability to experience humans, I guess, because ultimately my career is down to understanding them as deeply and as profoundly as I possibly can.
Right. Well, speaking of profound and deep understanding, I want to ask you about your major, because I haven't seen that layout before, where you have a P and an F for 9, where I normally see F under 8. And then I've seen W used before, but it's usually for 3, because M is upside down is a W. But you know, I never thought of Q for 7, for example, but that's great. And yeah, anyway, it's just an interesting layout. I wonder is that you adding your own stuff, or did you adopt it from somewhere, or is it in Tony Corinda, or I have no idea?
There are some of the mnemonic devices that are in Corinda and the like within this area, but I most of them there's no fixed system at the minute. When I looked at teaching people phonetic elements, and then you look at 4 being R and 5 being L and 6 being these different kind of wonderful sounds of sh and ch and this type of thing. If that didn't work for somebody, then I might revert back to the Dominic system in terms of A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and then you get to the differences that way around. So I work with a number of them. For example, that's just one of them, and it's very much based upon either a particular need or a purpose at that particular time. Like I first started looking at those differences when I looked at license plates, for example. Memorizing license plates is a particularly big deal when it comes to the community that I'm strong arming my way into,
Right.
and to be able to do them quickly as they pass by under real world implications of emotional state change within this area, so how can these initial couple of letters work together to create a different number that I can put a picture from? Does it work? If it does work, how can it work for others within this area? And that's very much where these systems come from. So there's like 3 or 4 that I use. To be fair, the most prominently used one that I come back to is the original pegging of 1 for T and D, 2 for N, 3 for M, 4 for R, 5 for L, 6 for all the different sounds, 7 for the harder versions of the sounds,
Right.
8 F, E, and 9 for P and B, 0 S and Z in that example. That's the one I come back to the most. That one with Q involved was created with license plates in mind, specifically for the UK. Because the way that we formulate our license plates over different periods, I think it first started in 2001, where there was 2 letters, then 2 numbers, then 3 letters at the end, and then it changed again towards the middle of 2011. So you would get these kind of 3 separate time frames for 3 different kinds of license plates, dependent upon the car, which led to different mnemonic devices needed to be able to do it with speed. So yeah, that's where the creation of those kind of substitution elements came in terms of the way I would teach people to do it. Because like you can look at mnemonic devices till the cows come home, but like the first thing that I think of when I hear of the number 31, it's not Matt, for example, as the first word that jumped in my head with 3 and a T. It's Family Guy, because the Griffin family lives at 31 spoons. So I didn't question those types of things. So when it comes to teaching people these other elements, if there's something else that stands out to this person on an idiosyncratic level, then that's what we go with. That's now your new number 4. That's now your new number 742 if you're the Simpsons.
Right.
For example, those are the way that I struck the differences, because again, it comes back to the Bruce Lee stuff. He used to say that we can both have a suit made from the same material, but it will fit us in very different ways. And the same thing for these techniques for me. We can both use the same technique, but we will use them in very different ways, because we will think about the source material through very different interpretations, as you rightly struck on earlier. And that's the reason for these kind of multiple examples. Take what the foundation says to you, but if you don't find any particular connection between pushing over the number 3 so it looks like an M to create this, then don't use it. Work with I don't know, that song 3 is the magic number, for example, or whatever other kind of connotation of 3 that comes up with, the Holy Trinity, if you're religious. Whatever works for you is the thing that works within that area, and from then on, the 3 won't be an M, or it won't be open handcuffs. For example, if you go with original Harry Lorraine stuff, it might be whatever kind of religious imagery that you've got to work with that makes you think of the Holy Trinity within that area.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's my key frustration in all the teaching. It's like, well, here's a bunch of things to memorize, rather than here's the system, understand how it works, and, make it your own. Because not only will you, but, it doesn't surprise me to see a different array of possible choices for 7 and throw a Q in there. That's exactly what one would want to do. And I mean, I might wind up using that, because there's a lot of words for my 00 to 99 that aren't as rich as they could be by throwing a Q in there. It's just genius, but I never thought of it before. So your point about wanting to go deeper and deeper and connect is a valid one, even for the language of memory. So I think we could go on all day and get deeper and deeper.
We probably could.
into the weeds. But in terms of just wrapping it up for this episode, and hope to have occasion to do this in the future, we didn't get to talk about your stunts. So maybe let's get into this, because it is the most interesting thing really about the teaching of memory, the marketing of memory, so to speak, the making it connect to more people. And normally in a memory competition, the most excitement you see are the 12-second card gets, or girls for that matter. I mean, it's not just this or that kind of person. It's everybody's doing it now. It's like skateboarding. Everybody gets involved these days. But that's the most excitement you ever see, is just. But you have all kinds of things, hot peppers or chilies or whatnot, and you're stressing yourself out. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier, like different states and placing yourself under duress, or putting yourself in a trunk or what have you. And that seems to me a little bit more Houdini than Sherlock. But what's the origin of this performative element that you've added to things?
It comes from that kind of competition background. Like I suppose, much like yourself, I am so passionate about memory as a tool to enhance everything that it is that you do. And if there are those, for better or for worse in this world, that only become interested in certain things because of the spectacle that they provide, how can I show the benefit of these kinds of tools in that kind of way? So that's the reason for this. And there are a number of these kinds of things hinted at through popular media and the like. Not just Sherlock with the blindfold over his head, but Liam Neeson did a similar thing in the second Taken film, where he's marking off the ticking of his clock. Ticking of his watch by different things that he hears in his surrounding, counting paces and linking all of this together so he can find where he was is taken to. And I'm very much that guy. I'll go, I wonder if I can actually do that. That's the only way I'm ever really going to know is to have a go. So the reason for the quote unquote I memorize series that I started at the minute was to see if I could experience all of these kinds of different situations that we seem to apply the story that we would struggle to remember things in. Like we've all heard the story of I don't remember what I did last night because I was drunk. So I got my friend I asked for a 500-digit number, but he used a number generator. So it was 500 numbers, but it was 1, 2, and 3-digit numbers. So it was a single stream. It ended up being 1,500. Oh, swine! But my game for that was to drink a bottle of bourbon, memorize the number, and then go to bed and see how much I could recall the next day. And I think I only made 18 mistakes, which on competition side is horrendous. But as a reality, it's still 1,400 and however many it is better than anyone else. And so I did the one chip challenge, which is like a Dorito, essentially, but it was made with Carolina Reaper chilies, and I had to eat that. And during the 5-minute burn, I had to memorize as many chili facts and figures and Scoville units as I could. The most recent one that went out yesterday was I stayed awake for 48 hours and then memorized a story that was designed to put you to sleep. So I got like a sleep mask on, and I got all snuggly in my bed after 48 hours. And it was one of these Matthew McConaughey kinds of like apps that they're out. But there's a number of the videos on YouTube, for example. So I tried to memorize that just to see if I could focus on my comfort. And it was interesting because there was a number of times where I had to say to myself, "Am I asleep? Do I really know what's going on?" I had to forcibly flap my eyelashes against the inside of the mask. Okay, no, I am awake. I am doing this. I know what's going on. And so yeah, that was the things that I like to try, because it's to me it might be my own interpretation or not. Whether it comes across, I don't know. But to me, it's showing the benefit that memory can have in a way that isn't immediately recognized in the way that most people might think of memorization, or focus, blinkers on, silence, this kind of endeavor. But like when you're out people reading in the world, you can't tell everybody shut up a minute so I can focus on this kind of behavior. You've got to be able to do it in the actual environment. So that's why I thought, how much can I stress myself out in many different ways to be able to do that. So the ones that we've got coming up is I'm going to try and memorize gold medal gymnastic winners for I think it's the last 40 Olympics, or whatever the kind of gold medal equivalent was back then, because I've not looked at it yet. My cohort has the information, but I'm going to try and memorize that as I'm doing backflips. And I'm not gymnastic by any sense of the at all. It's just a case of a large human throwing himself backwards on a trampoline. So I'm going to do that, and then the other thing, I've got like 12 to 15 of us. We're going to go paintballing, and then they're going to sticker themselves with different kind of colored images and devices to see if, while I'm paintballing, I can memorize who is what and the environment and this type of thing, just to see how that kind of transpires. But that was the main kind of curiosity, is to see something as a spectacle and go, I wonder how real that actually is. Okay, I'm going to go and try. And I'm going to use the same stakes that the film or the TV show or whatever kind of conceptualize the idea, just to see where it lies. And if I get to it and go, wow, that absolutely failed, couldn't do that, then I know more about the thing. Like the first time I tried to solve a Rubik's Cube underwater was just an incredible failure.
Well, I mean, I love it. I really admire the imagination that goes into cooking up those things. The best I could do is, see if we can get you, memorizing Spanish vocabulary during a bull run.
Yes.
Or at least what do you call it? A piñata or something. And then, yeah. It's filled with the vocabulary you have to memorize, or I don't know, whatever.
That's brilliant.
That's the end brilliant. Of my imagination. But if your partner is so successful to convince you to learn some Spanish to go down to Spain, but I'm sure there's Chinese equivalents or what have you in German. You could try and do it while eating an ice spine. Try to memorize all the different pig-related words while you're eating ice spine.
Oh yes, that sounds quite fun. There was a similar one that came in on one of my streams. What you're talking about kung fu in China and martial arts is to sit in horse stance, but to do it for like a ridiculous amount of time, right? To see, when your body starts to shake and get physically tired, then start to memorize, just to see how much you can focus on that particular area. So the bind one, that sounds much more fun, much more challenging. but that's the thing. I will openly and happily have a go at any kind of challenge just to see whether it's pass or fail, whether it's near, whether it's not, then ultimately I learn a little bit more about myself and how I perform under condition X or laboratory Y.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I appreciate this and look forward to seeing more of these things. I'll have all the links and stuff for you, but where do people need to go? What's your favorite destination for them?
Mostly, if it's this kind of avenue that people enjoy, the YouTube channel might be the best thing, because we do like live streams where you can get involved and have this kind of like live feedback remark. But I'm on most social media. I don't tend to stick myself to one area, but YouTube is by and large becoming the most interactive environment. If that's your particular favorite, then that's the one that you go to. But that's the one where all of the quote unquote memory stunts are within this area too.
Right. And your book is still available.
Yes. My book, the monographs, is still available, softback, hardback. You can get that from most places online, and it's just become available on Audible as well. Right. With thankfully, it's not me reading it. You don't have to listen to me for 14 hours or whatever it is. It's this wonderful chap, JT McDaniel, who's this remarkably kind of profound English voice.
Oh, that sounds
within
great.
This area. Yeah, he's really cool.
Cool. Well, thank you again, and I encourage people to follow up. And of course, you have your website, which I'll link to as well, which has some great blog posts and.
Thank you.
You can look at the full major as you lay it out there, and other thoughts and musings on things like body language that we didn't get into, which maybe we can bookmark for a future time.
Well, I'd love to. It's been an absolute delight chatting. It's really woke me up, because it was like 4:30 in the morning when I got up this morning, and I was feeling particular. Now I'm raring for the day. I'm psyched.
Beautiful. Well, I hope I don't look like I'm starting to flag, but it's evening here in Australia, and what a great way to spend the early onset of the evening. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Sincerely, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. Awesome. Condition X and laboratory Y. This is a metaphor for life, isn't it? The question is, are you going to prepare yourself to take on the challenges and condition X when it arrives, as Ben does? Well, I hope so. And I hope you found this conversation interesting and rewarding. Make sure to subscribe to Ben's channel, visit his site at bencardall.com, and as always, thank you for being part of the Magnetic Memory Method community. If you're a channel member, extra special thanks for supporting this initiative in that way. And if you have any of the books or programs that I put out, I really, really appreciate it. Everyone on Team Magnetic appreciates it more than words can allow. Now, if you enjoy conversations like this, why not check out our epic discussion with Ron White next. It's made possible by you, after all. You'll learn exactly how Ron memorized 2,300 names. This is one of the most amazing memory demonstrations in history, now that we're talking about Ben's memory demonstrations. And any memory demonstration is amazing, but 2,300 names, wow. And it's meaningful too, as you'll see. So riddle me this. As you go out and check Ben's work, check out Ron's work, can you deduce how they did it? Did you see how they did it, or did you observe?